The day we buried my wife of 41 years, my daughter-in-law checked her phone during the eulogy. I noticed it the way you notice a splinter, small, sharp, impossible to ignore. She was standing beside my son Vincent, her thumb moving across the screen just below her coat pocket, thinking nobody could see. I told myself she was grieving differently. People do that. I told myself a lot of things that afternoon that I no longer believe. Eleanor's funeral was on a Tuesday in late November. The ground was hard already, that particular Ohio cold that gets into your joints and stays there. We buried her under the oak tree in Meadowbrook Cemetery, the one she'd pointed to herself 3 years earlier when we'd bought the plots together. She laughed when we did it. That real laugh she had, the kind that came from her stomach. "Might as well pick a nice view," she'd said. That was Eleanor. Practical right down to the bone, but never without humor. 41 years. We'd raised Vincent in a 2-bedroom house in Columbus before I built the business into something worth having. Heating and cooling systems. Unglamorous work, but honest work, and over time I'd turned one truck into a fleet of 12, a small office into a company that employed 23 people. Eleanor had kept the books for the first 15 years, sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, with reading glasses she never admitted she needed. She knew every invoice, every late payment, every vendor who tried to shortchange us. When she finally handed the accounting off to a professional firm, the accountant told me she'd been running a cleaner operation than most MBAs he'd seen. I don't say this to brag. I say it because you need to understand what we built together and what certain people thought they were about to inherit. Vincent married Sasha 8 years ago. She was sharp. I'll give her that. Sharp in the way that a certain kind of person is sharp, where the intelligence is always pointed outward, toward advantage, never inward toward self-examination. She came from money that had mostly run out, and she had never quite adjusted to the reduced circumstances. I think she looked at Vincent, who would one day inherit a profitable HVAC company, and made a calculation. I'm not being unkind. I'm being accurate. In the early years, I ignored the signals. The way she steered conversations toward real estate and asset valuations. The way she'd ask about the business structure with a casual curiosity that wasn't casual at all. Eleanor noticed before I did. She told me once, quietly, while we were washing dishes together after a Sunday dinner, "That woman is always taking inventory." I'd told her she was being too hard on Sasha. Eleanor had handed me a wet plate and said nothing more. She was right. She was usually right. She was usually right. They had a son, my grandson Noah. He was 6 years old when Eleanor died. Bright boy, curious about everything, always had a book under his arm or dirt on his knees from whatever project he'd invented in the backyard. I loved that kid from the moment I held him at the hospital. Still do. That matters for later. The funeral reception was at our house. My house, the Colonial on Birchwood Drive that Eleanor and I had moved into when Vincent was in high school. Sasha had organized it, which I appreciated at the time. In retrospect, I think she was already walking the rooms with different eyes, measuring spaces, mentally redecorating. She waited exactly 4 days. 4 days after we put Eleanor in the ground, Sasha sat down across from me at my own kitchen table and told me it was time to think seriously about transition planning. Those were her words. Transition planning. Like I was a municipal infrastructure project. Vincent sat beside her and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. I was 67 years old. I had not yet forgotten the single invoice number, client name, or service contract in my professional life. I played chess online 3 nights a week and won more than I lost. But Sasha spoke to me in that particular slow, clear cadence that people use when they're talking to someone they've already decided is diminished. The company needs younger leadership. Vince is ready. And frankly, you've been under a lot of stress, she said. Eleanor would have wanted you to rest. There it was. Eleanor, deployed as a rhetorical instrument 4 days into her absence. I looked at my son. He studied the grain of the kitchen table. I told him I'd think about it. It was not a lie. I did think about it. I thought about it quite carefully, starting that same evening, sitting alone in the house that had never felt so large or so quiet, going through every document, every contingency, every piece of legal architecture my attorney had helped me build over the previous decade. What Sasha didn't know, what Vincent apparently hadn't told her, or perhaps didn't know himself, was that Eleanor and I had restructured everything 4 years prior. The business sat inside a family trust with terms that I'd had drafted specifically to prevent what Sasha was now attempting. I'd done it quietly, after a conversation with my attorney about what he'd seen happen to other business owners when they got older. He'd told me stories. I'd listened. I'd signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon in March and gone home and told Eleanor, who had simply nodded and said, "Good, but I'm getting ahead of myself." After that first conversation, things in the house changed. Sasha began coming over more frequently, usually while Vincent was at work, which I came to understand was intentional. She'd arrive with food, casseroles, baked goods, the props of caregiving, and then stay too long, asking questions with her eyes on everything except my face. She went through Eleanor's desk once. I saw her from the hallway. She was moving papers with a focused efficiency that had nothing to do with grief. When she noticed me watching, she said she was looking for a recipe Eleanor had mentioned. I said I'd find it and let her know. I never did. There were phone calls too, long ones between her and Vincent that stopped when I walked into a room. There was a Sunday dinner where she brought up, casually, over pot roast, whether I'd ever considered a smaller place, something easier to maintain. There was the morning I came downstairs and found her in the kitchen measuring the window above the sink. She said she was thinking about curtains. I said that was thoughtful and went back upstairs. I am a patient man. Eleanor used to say I was the most patient man she'd ever known, and she did not always mean it as a compliment, but that patience had served me well in business, knowing when to speak and when to let someone keep talking until they'd said more than they intended. So I waited. I also made some phone calls of my own. My attorney's name is Miles Harrington. We've worked together for over 20 years. He's the kind of lawyer who doesn't talk fast or charge unnecessary hours, which is why I've kept him through every stage of the business. I called Miles 3 weeks after Eleanor's funeral and told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting, which is another reason I've kept him. The trust structure holds, he said. They can't move anything without your signature, and the succession terms are exactly what we wrote them to be. But let me ask, do you have documentation of these conversations? Anything in writing? I didn't, but I started keeping notes after that call. Dates, times, what was said. I wrote it in a small green notebook I kept in the breast pocket of my housecoat. Old habit from running a business. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. The situation clarified itself further in January. I was coming down with something, a chest cold that had settled in and wouldn't leave, and I'd spent 2 days in bed. Sasha had come over to help, which meant she was in the house while I was upstairs, not fully well, less guarded than usual. I heard voices below me, hers and Vincent's, both of them this time. I wasn't trying to listen. But the house is old, the vents carry sound, and I've known the acoustics of every room for 25 years. He's not going to just sign it over, Vincent said. He sounded tired. He will when the alternative looks worse, Sasha said. We just have to be patient. What does that mean? It means we build a case. It means we document things. It means we have people who can speak to his state of mind. Silence. Sasha. He's almost 70, Vincent. He had a wife for 40 years and now she's gone. That does things to people. It's not even dishonest. I lay in bed with a cold cloth on my forehead and listened to my daughter-in-law outline a plan to have me declared incompetent. My son said nothing to stop her. I waited until they left, then I got up, found my phone, and called Miles. Document everything, he said. And when is this inheritance meeting they've been pushing for? They've been pushing for a formal family meeting since December, framed as a financial planning session. I'd been non-committal. Miles told me to set it, to pick a date, invite them formally, and let them come prepared to say what they were planning to say. Why? I asked. Because I want to be there, he said. I set the meeting for a Saturday in February. I told Vincent it was time to discuss the future of the family and the business. I told him to bring Sasha. I told him it would be a good idea to come prepared. In the 2 weeks before the meeting, several things happened. I drove to my accountant's office and reviewed every financial document associated with the business and the trust. Everything was exactly as it should be. I then drove to the Department of Vital Records and made copies of certain documents that I haven't looked at in several years. I also had a conversation with a man named Daniel Kowalski, whom I had known for about 3 years, and whom my grandson Noah had called the funny man at the coffee shop since they'd first met the previous summer. Daniel was 34 years old. He had his mother's eyes and my chin, and the first time I'd really looked at him sitting across a table at the Bexley Diner, I'd felt something shift in my chest that I didn't have a word for yet. He was the son of a woman named Patricia Oakes, whom I had dated briefly, very briefly, in the winter of 1989, between 2 difficult years in the business, and before I'd reconciled with Eleanor after a separation neither of us ever talked about much. Patricia had moved away. I hadn't known she was pregnant. I hadn't known Daniel existed until 18 months ago, when he'd written me a letter, careful and formal and clearly written and rewritten many times, explaining who he was and what he'd found through a DNA ancestry website. I hadn't told Vincent. I hadn't told anyone. I'd spent those 18 months slowly, carefully, getting to know Daniel. Coffees that turned into lunches, lunches that turned into him coming to the house, meeting Eleanor, who had wept and then composed herself, and then wept again and said, "He looks like your father." We'd done a proper DNA test through a physician I trusted. It confirmed what we already knew. He was my son. And he had no idea, that February Saturday, what was about to happen when he walked into my living room. I'd asked him to be there at 11. The meeting with Vincent and Sasha was set for 10. They arrived early, which didn't surprise me. Sasha had a leather portfolio. Vincent was wearing a jacket, which he almost never does on weekends. They sat down on the couch together like they'd rehearsed the seating arrangement. I offered them coffee. I was calm. I had been calm for 2 weeks, in the way that the air gets calm before a specific kind of weather. Sasha opened the portfolio and began talking almost immediately. She'd clearly prepared. There was language about capacity concerns, about the responsibilities of legacy, about what Eleanor would have wanted for the family. There was a document she slid across the coffee table, a transfer agreement she called it, that would move controlling interest in the business to Vincent, effectively, immediately, with a small income designated for my retirement needs. She said it gently. She said it with the expression of someone delivering difficult but necessary news to someone who might not fully process it. "I think you know this is the right thing, Len," she said. "My name is Leonard." She knew that. She'd been calling me Len for the past month. A small softening she'd introduced incrementally, like a sound she was trying to make me accustomed to. I picked up the document. I read it. I set it back down on the table. "Where did you have this drafted?" I asked. "We worked with a financial planning firm," she said. "Not an attorney." She smiled. "We wanted to keep it simple." I nodded. I looked at Vincent. He was looking at the carpet. "Vincent," I said. He looked up. "Is this what you want?" He opened his mouth, closed it, said, "Dad, we just think." "Is this what you want?" I said again, quiet, not angry, just the question. He didn't answer, which was an answer. The doorbell rang at 5 minutes past 11. I got up and let Miles in first. Then Daniel. I watched Sasha's face when they walked in. Miles she might have recognized. He'd done some work for the family business in the past. But Daniel she had never met. She looked at him the way people look at a face that is almost familiar, but not quite, trying to place it, finding something unsettling in the almost recognition. I introduced Daniel as my son. Sasha made a sound. Vincent stood up. I held up one hand, not dramatic, just clear, and asked everyone to sit down. Miles sat in the armchair nearest the window. Daniel sat beside me on the loo seat. He was nervous, I could tell, but he held himself steady. I explained, as plainly as I could, what Miles proceeded to document in greater detail, the trust structure, the succession plan, the legal framework that Eleanor and I had put in place specifically because we had seen this kind of situation unfold for other families and had chosen, deliberately, to prevent it. The transfer agreement Sasha had presented was void on its face, a structural impossibility if he'd bothered to consult an actual attorney rather than a financial planning firm. Then Miles explained the succession terms as written. The business would pass in time to both Vincent and Daniel in equal share, with conditions attached that required both to remain actively involved in operations for a minimum of 5 years before any sale could be considered. Neither could act without the other's agreement. There was a third clause that I had added 18 months ago, when Daniel and I had first gotten our results back, a provision that Noah, my grandson, would receive a protected educational trust regardless of any other family circumstances. Sasha said very carefully, "You can't just produce a son from nowhere and change the inheritance." Miles told her equally carefully that in fact the trust had been amended through entirely legal and properly documented process, and that she was welcome to challenge it, and that he would be happy to provide her the names of 3 family estate attorneys whom he respected and who would tell her the same thing. She turned to Vincent. "I watched my son look at Daniel, really look the way you look when you're trying to find something in a face, and I watched something complicated move across his expression. Not anger exactly, not grief, something older and harder than either of those." "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Not Sasha, me. I needed to know him first," I said, "before I introduced him to circumstances like this." Vincent was quiet for a long time. Sasha put her hand on his arm and he moved his arm away. "Just slightly, just enough. And the company," he said, "is yours to run." I said, "Both of yours, if Daniel's willing, and I hope he will be. I didn't build it to sell it. I built it so the people inside it would be taken care of. That's still true." We sat in that living room for another hour. Sasha spoke less and less. At one point she stood up and said she needed some air and went to stand on the back porch, and through the kitchen window I could see her on her phone, and I imagined she was calling the financial planning firm, or possibly a different kind of attorney altogether, and I felt very tired and very clear at the same time. Before they left, Vincent stopped at the door. Sasha had already gone to the car. He looked at Daniel for a moment, then at me. "Was Mum, did she know about him?" "She knew," I said. "She's the one who suggested I add Noah's clause." He nodded very slowly, and then he walked outside. Daniel and I sat in the living room after everyone had gone. Miles had packed his briefcase and shaken both our hands and let himself out. The house was quiet in the particular way it gets on cold February afternoons when the light is low and grey and nothing is moving outside. "You okay?" Daniel asked. I thought about it. "I've been better," I said, "but I've also been worse." He smiled, and it was Eleanor's smile. Not the features, just the quality of it, the way it came in slowly and meant something. "I don't know how to explain that, but it was there." "What happens now?" he said. "I don't know exactly," I said, "but the house is yours to come back to, whenever you want, for whatever that's worth." He didn't say anything. He put his hand on my shoulder for a moment, the way men do when they've run out of adequate language, and I thought that maybe this was something I could get used to. Outside, the light was still cold and grey, but the sky had that quality that comes before snow. A kind of held breath, the whole world pausing before something new comes down and covers everything that was there before. I got up and put the kettle on. There was nothing left to decide today. There was time now for everything else. I've been sitting with this for a while now, and the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the meeting, or the document Sasha slid across the table, or even the look on Vincent's face when Daniel walked through the door. What keeps coming back to me is the kettle, that moment after everyone had gone, when I got up and put the kettle on, and the house was just quiet, no agenda, no performance, just water heating up and whatever came next. I think about the choices that led to that moment, not just mine. Everyone's. Sasha made her choices. They were calculated and patient and, in her own way, disciplined. She wasn't stupid. She wasn't impulsive. She just built her plan on a foundation she never bothered to verify, because she assumed I was the kind of man who didn't plan, who didn't think ahead, who would hand over everything he'd built because grief had made him soft. That assumption was the crack in everything she constructed. There's a version of me that could have reacted differently. When she sat across from me 4 days after Eleanor's funeral and started talking about transition planning, I felt something move through me, not quite anger, something older than anger. I could have said everything I was thinking right then. I could have shown my hand immediately, called Miles that same afternoon, made it loud. I didn't, and I thought about why. Eleanor used to say that the difference between reacting and responding is about 10 seconds and a whole lot of self-knowledge. She was right. What I did in those months, keeping notes in a green notebook, calling Miles quietly, getting to know Daniel slowly and honestly before introducing him to a situation that could have swallowed him, none of that was clever strategy in the way Sasha was playing strategy. It was something simpler. It was knowing what I actually valued and refusing to let someone else's timeline become mine. I think that's the thing nobody tells you about integrity. It's not comfortable. It doesn't announce itself. Those months of watching Sasha move through my house, measuring windows, going through Eleanor's desk, speaking to me in that slow, deliberate voice like I was already somewhere else. I had to let that happen. I had to stay patient through something that felt deeply undignified, because acting too early, out of hurt or pride, would have cost me far more than it cost her. And then there's Daniel, 34 years old, sitting across from me at the Bexley diner the first time, holding that letter he'd rewritten so many times. He hadn't come looking for money. He'd come looking for a fact, just the honest shape of where he came from. That kind of courage, quiet and costly and without any guarantee of return, is something I didn't take lightly. It would have been easy for him to feel resentment. He had every reason. He chose something harder than resentment. He chose to simply show up, week after week, and find out who I actually was before deciding what I meant to him. What happened in that living room on a cold February Saturday wasn't magic. It was the accumulated result of people making choices consistently over a long stretch of time. Some of those choices were small: a phone call, a note in a pocket notebook, a cup of coffee at a diner. Some were large, but they added up into something that held when the pressure came, and they held because they were built on what was actually true. Noah will grow up knowing he has a trust that his grandmother made sure was protected. I hope someday that means something to him beyond money. I hope it means someone loved him carefully enough to think about his future before he knew he had one. I don't know exactly what comes next for Vincent and me. That's honest. There is damage there that won't fix itself overnight. But I left that door open, and I meant it. The kettle boiled that afternoon, and I made 2 cups of tea, and Daniel and I sat at Eleanor's kitchen table and talked about nothing important for a while. The kind of conversation that doesn't need to go anywhere because just having it is already the thing. 41 years with Eleanor taught me that the most valuable things don't announce themselves. They accumulate, quietly, in the decisions you make when no one's watching, and nothing is certain. I'm still learning that, but I think I'm learning it right.